Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Thanks everybody for being here and thanks to Core for hosting us. Can you please call the roll, Meryl? Okay.
Present.
Member Gagos? Here. Member Dixon?
Member Reiner.
Here.
Councilmember Carroll.
Here.
Member Weinberger. And Chair.
Here. Okay, so thanks again for hosting us today. This room is awesome.
Yeah.
And this is my first time in this space in general, and it looks incredible. So great job. It's a nice addition to the downtown.
Thank you.
Can you just tell us a little bit about what you're doing here?
Doing lots of renovations here, so I'm glad we're almost done, but I'd be happy to give anyone a tour after we're done in here if you want to stick around just to show you what we did with the building. And but for what Core does, I don't know if we've talked about that very much, but we're professional services, and primarily majority of us are civil engineers, so we deal with development work, land development, whether it's residential, single family, multifamily, commercial, industrial. We go through the whole development design process to do all the entitlements and then all the engineering related to it. We also have a natural resources group that does environmental permitting, and that their primary work is renewable energy for wind farms and solar farms. So if you've driven out to Lyman, Lincoln County, all those big wind turbines out there, the majority of those are our projects out there for the turbines that we've done for Next Era Energy that's based out of Florida. So it's again a national client and everything. And then we do also have about 10 to 15% of our business that's municipal public infrastructure type work. So just general roadways, stormwater improvements, just to support cities and towns like Englewood. And then kind of our main service lines are engineering, land surveying, and then again, biologists and scientists that do that kind of environmental permitting. So that's what we do. We're happy to be in Englewood, and our employee, we just went to full capacity a week ago, and our employees absolutely love the new location, the neighborhood, the community. They're meeting all the other shops and business owners nearby, and just are thrilled to be here. I mean, we're calling it Core 2.0, and we're very happy to be in Englewood.
It's a cool story coming back into the building after all the work and COVID, of course.
Yeah, I mean, when COVID started, we were in our old location, so a lot of our employees, it's the first time they've come back, seen everybody, and then also it's like, again, a new company because it's in a place they never went to before necessarily and saw it like this.
Where were you before?
In downtown Littleton, so right off of Littleton Boulevard.
How'd you choose to come to Englewood?
We needed size. We've grown from 7 people in 2014 to we just turned 74 employees this week.
Wow.
So, and we have an office. This is our main office, but we also have an office up in Winter Park that covers the whole Grand Valley that's growing like crazy too. So we've got 6 people up there now. So we chose this area. We needed a space the size, and our employees told us they wanted it to be centrally located, good access, still access to light rail, access to the South Platte bike path, similar to what we had in Littleton. And they did not want to be downtown, did not want to be in the Denver Tech Center. They wanted to be in a community that was walkable with great shops and services all nearby that they could come park their car or even ride their bike to work. And so this was the bullseye. We said, let's start shopping real estate in this area.
And I just quickly like to add, if I could, that we worked with Blake and his team on an economic incentive for them to get over the finish line to come down to us. We did a little bit of fee rebates for them because they're bringing so many employees to the core of downtown. It made economic sense for the city to do that. So we were fortunate to be able to work with you all.
We appreciate that. We're going to reinvest those funds right back into the building, and hopefully, again, we haven't even finished our exterior yet, so there's more to come. So.
Well, as the owner of the bar down the street, I'm really happy y'all are here.
We've got our own little beer tap in the back, but it's nothing like the selection that's down the street, and we don't quite have the nice patios either. So
Not yet, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll move on. Is there anyone else, any discussion or comments, questions? Okay. We'll move on to consideration of minutes from the previous session. Is there any discussion? Do we have a motion to approve the minutes of the regular EDDA board meeting of May 26th?
Motion to approve.
Okay, we can call the vote for that.
Member Calvert,
Yes.
member Gallego,
Yes.
member Reinhardt,
Yes.
council members Sarah.
Yep.
And Chair Zerke.
Yes.
Minutes are adopted.
Okay, old business, the downtown plan of development. Is this, Hillary, are you leading this?
Yeah, so this resolution accomplishes two things. It, number one, approves the downtown plan and sends it to city council, or actually planning commission and then city council for approval. And number two, it recommends turning on 3 TIF sub-districts. And so the rationale behind the recommendation for the 3 sub-districts is the document I sent last night. I'd like to kind of give you some highlights so that we're having an informed discussion here. Following our special session last May, this is our 3rd meeting. No, I want to go through the TIF recommendations first. So as you'll recall, we've recommended changing the boundaries of the TIF areas. So that is reflected in the downtown plan that was attached to this packet and what you approved today. And I'll show you those pages in a minute. In terms of which tax increment areas to start collecting in, this is not debt authorization. This is the DDA's ability to collect tax increment over and above the base level every year. We're recommending that we turn on the property tax clock and sales tax clock in the medical district area and the sales tax clock in the South Broadway area. And the reason we're recommending that has to do with a number of factors. And I finally kind of put it all in one document because we've learned a lot as a board, and as staff and consultants went back and dug a little bit deeper, we came to some additional conclusions and inferences, and I wanted to share those with you. We think downtown Englewood is on the way up right now, and there are a number of reasons for that, despite the disruptions of COVID-19 last year. Number one, the strong fundamentals that were in place here while we were doing all the downtown planning in 2019 and 2020 are still in place. It's a strong central location, as Blake just said, access to light rail. There are new demographic trends in town. We have younger millennial families who are moving here to have kids and have a more affordable quality of life than they can have in Denver, and older boomers that are moving to this area as well. So young families, small kids, and seniors are joining the existing population here. And they're all looking for small town living with a walkable downtown. So that appeal is still in place. Fortunately, there's a diversified retail mix in this area. While our bars suffered greatly with revenues down 60 to 80% last year, Walmart was booming ahead. Hardware was booming ahead. Garbage supplies, pet supplies. Lots of retailers actually did very well last year, while others struggled mightily. But that's kind of helped with downtown's resilience in coming out of this economic downturn. We have a lot of new development on the horizon. Looks quiet now, but we need to get educated about what's in the pipeline. There are about 10 new residential developments underway right now along South Hampden with 357 new residential homes. Most of them are townhomes, slot homes, and condominiums, and over 100,000 square feet of new office space, most of it medical office. Both hospitals are planning significant expansions. So new medical personnel, new patients coming to the area to join the new residents who are moving in. All of those are customers for downtown, right? City center is in play. Dan's working on some potential deals in that part of town. We know we've got some residential deals south of Hamden already. We have a new vision and new capacity for downtown. The creation of this entity and this board and this downtown plan and strategy is a signal to the market that Englewood is getting it together. We are getting in gear. And that's the kind of place that people want to invest. People want to live in a community that is focused and moving forward. New businesses want to move to an area like that. Developers want to invest in an area like that. So we are part of this upward trajectory. We're creating some momentum with our new marketing, the new grant programs we're going after, the Downtown Plan Award. We are now known as a best in Colorado. We're not just creeping along, we're sort of coming out gangbusters, okay? The maintenance we're doing along South Broadway and Hampton, all of those things are the things that the downtown district does, and we are already implementing. And then we need to understand the impact of economic recovery funding that is coming to this community through the state and the federal government. It's an infusion of public money, okay? Private investment typically follows public commitment. Okay, so when new public money is being invested into an area, the private market responds to that as well. And hopefully we will have a chance to guide some of those investments because we'll be eligible for some of that grant funding. So we need to understand this is generational, a generational opportunity. The kinds of federal money that's coming into the state, the metro area, and this community are pretty unprecedented. Okay, so then as it pertains to the recommended TIF strategy, we were trying to balance several goals. Number one, we needed to determine short-term EDDA funding both for our operations and smaller projects. Number two, we needed to achieve debt authorization in the short term so that the DDA can plan and invest in longer-term, larger-scale projects. Three, we needed to maximize the long-term potential of the tax increment by not turning on the clocks too soon. And four, we needed to consider, political considerations, which play a role in everything that we do as well. So phase one, we're recommending starting those two sales tax districts and the property tax district in the medical district or wellness district, which may be the new marketing term area. The rationale for turning on the property tax increment in the wellness district is the critical mass of new development I just mentioned and the two hospital expansions. Even without the hospital expansions, early property tax revenue forecast suggests about a $500,000 increment in 2022, increasing to about $800,000 in 2024. So we would like to capture that increment. If it's going to happen anyway, let's turn on the clock and let's use it to run this organization and invest in the downtown projects that you determine to be a priority. Okay. We're not recommending turning on the property tax increment yet on South Broadway because we don't have the same critical mass of development that we know is in the pipeline. We'll wait on that one. The rationale for activating sales tax increment collection in South Broadway and the Wellness District. Again, it's all about sort of the downtown recovery that I just talked about, the new development that's in that pipeline, the hospital expansions. Together, these things will stimulate new customer spending, new business relocations, and development investment interest, along with the investments and activities of the Downtown Development Authority. In the fall of 2021, we are recommending seeking voter approval of debt authorization. That's later on our agenda, so I'd like to sort of bookmark that piece until we come back to it. Stay focused on the increment right now. In terms of political considerations, we need to be bold. This board has emphasized to me we need to be bold, and I'm trying to respond to your enthusiasm. This is the time to get the DDA set up for long-term success. And if we have the ability to turn on these 3 tax increment areas, I think we should do it, and we should continue implementing and not miss a beat. It is important to remember that every time we turn on a new TIF area clock, plan of development has to be updated and approved by this board, the planning commission, and city council. So it's a process, and it's an important decision that we'll make again and again.
What's the time frame on that process? If we, I mean, are we looking at 3 months, 6 months? I mean, what is that?
Before we will.
No, just for the, to get through the planning and zoning commission and city council approval typically.
Oh, it's several months. I mean, if you guys approve it today, we go to planning commission, we have a date yet on that, do you know?
I think early July.
Early July, and then we go to city council July 19th.
That could be the day. We don't have that one tied down yet.
So it's a month. There's this question about sharing TIF revenues with the school district. I just want to be clear here that unlike urban renewal law in the state of Colorado, downtown development authorities are not required to share any tax increment with other tax entities. However, if it involves property tax that affects the school district, we need to engage with the school district, and they can serve in an advisory capacity to how we expend those funds. Early discussions with the school district and the county have begun at a very high level with the city manager, but we'll need to move forward working with Brad closely as the city starts to have these discussions. We, the DDA, cannot enter into any agreement with other tax entities, only the city can. So it is a city negotiation that we should support. See, Brad? Let's see. Then we're projecting kind of a phase 2 tax increment phase would be 2024, 2025 and beyond, where we would start to activate property and sales tax increment in the city center sub area, when the redevelopment plans are more defined and new development is planned or underway. And then look at starting property tax increment in the South Broadway sub area when there's a critical mass of development planned or underway. We've had some limitations in our ability to project sales tax revenues, which are being rectified. And until recently, the city was unable to break down retailers by merchant type. So we don't know how bars are doing versus how Walmart's doing versus how restaurants are doing and stuff like that. We can't really analyze how each category of retailer is doing over the years. We have aggregate sales tax revenue data, which is in this document. We can see that it went down about 11% in 2020 due to the pandemic, but we also had all those residential properties along, or those new projects along South Hampton used to be retail sites. So we're having a turnover of retail uses along Old Hampton that contribute to that decline. There's also the loss of a drugstore in that area a couple of years ago that is part of that. And we think there are some taxable things the hospitals do that probably went down in 2020 due to people holding off of elective surgeries, or maybe certain supplies or services weren't offered during the pandemic that affected the sales tax collection of the hospitals. We don't really know that exactly yet. Do you want to add anything on the sales tax?
The only thing I would add is there's going to be sort of a limit on our ability to look granularly. The city has 108 different merchant codes that it uses, and it has by ordinance a requirement to keep those merchants' information confidential. And so the balancing act that the DDA has is we have to figure out how to group those together such that it's not compromising any one merchant's confidentiality. But it's giving this body enough information to be able to be smart about the mix of merchants that we're seeing in the DDA, so you guys can monitor the activity and kind of encourage filling in gaps, if you will, in a well-rounded community. So we just luckily had a conversation this morning with the revenue staff, and we will come back to you guys with some recommendations on what we think, kind of hit that balance of what are some categories we can slot in that give you the business intelligence that you need to be informed, but don't compromise anybody's confidentiality. So look for that in the coming days and weeks.
So that this is the sales tax chart, and again, this is aggregate stuff by sub areas. So medical district is here, South Broadway is here, city center is here. Kind of goes up and down depending on the sub area and activity in that sub area in any given year.
We did learn one other really interesting thing this morning, and that is that when this information was initially requested to be gathered, sales and use tax were bundled together. And so use tax is actually excluded from the DDA's tax increment authority. So the interesting fact I learned this morning is that in the medical district, staff is estimating that almost 80% of the number that you see there is use tax related. And so that really, for the DDA's purposes, you actually don't care because you only care about new. And whether that starts at $1.1 million or $1.5 million or 200,000, that doesn't really matter. It's whatever the new activity is what gets captured. And so they were really concerned that we might be doing forecasts based off the historical numbers, which would have, of course, distorted any of our forecasts. So we said, no. Good news, we haven't gotten enough detail to actually do any forecasting, so we haven't done anything with this information yet. But you'll see those numbers, especially in the medical, kind of drop a lot when we filter out use tax history and just stick with sales tax history. So that'll be updated.
We also looked at potential projects of the DDA. And this is called possible because it's not really reflective of your attempts to prioritize projects. So I want to be clear about that. We're just trying to pull from the downtown plan the projects that were recommended throughout it and do an estimate of what it could cost to take on some of these larger projects. And they really vary from large kind of streetscape improvements along Old Hampden to investments in older buildings and alley activations and tree canopy along South Broadway to new streetscape and infrastructure in city center, even participating in some new development that might result in some shared benefits to the area, and improving some of the public spaces like the city center piazza. This is a fun project, this greenway that runs through downtown that could happen if we were to daylight Little Dry Creek. So, big projects require big money and a lot of time. We're not going to come anywhere near to addressing these on a year-to-year budget of $200,000, right? So here is what, here's the kind of costs we're really looking at here. It could be $10 million in South Broadway to do the sorts of improvements we'd like to do there. Another $35 million in City Center, another $10 million along Old Hampden, $10 million along Englewood Parkway and the infrastructure needed in City Center, maybe $5 million on facade improvements or what they call building improvement grants. So, helping businesses improve their existing buildings so that they can span and stay in place, and we're maintaining that sense of historic identity here. Another $10 million on future opportunities. You have to remain open to what may come our way as we get rolling here. We will get rolling here. But this is just to illustrate how expensive some of this work really is. And the reason it hasn't gotten done in Englewood is because there's no money for it. The city doesn't have an extra $25, $35 million lying around. That's why the Downtown Development Authority and the ability to utilize tax increment financing was recommended and ultimately created. So your first decision is the resolution to approve the downtown plan and the new tax increment areas. I put in the downtown plan was edited in a few pages, and it's really about defining the boundaries of the sub area. There's a few areas of the plan where it specifically says the city center area located west of Bannock and Englewood Parkway, south of Oklahoma Street. And then the map has been adjusted, and now the new boundary kind of juts out like this. And the South Broadway section goes out like this. The medical district is east of Logan. It's another page where it talks about the boundaries of the sub area. I had to update those with the new streets we discussed at our special meeting. In the discussion about tax increment financing, I added language about what state DDA statute specifies regarding revenue sharing with other taxing entities. That's,
Can I ask a question about that?
that's it.
Are other DDAs that you're aware of in sharing agreements?
Yes, but they're very old DDAs. The DDA statute does require a 50% revenue share for a DDA that reaches its 30-year term and then extends another 20 years. So Fort Collins and Longmont are both in that situation. They've extended their DDA term or their TIF term another 20 years, and they're doing a 50% revenue share with the school district and county.
Are you aware of any younger DDAs that haven't reached their 30-year time limit
No.
that are in sharing agreements?
No, I did interview a number of DDAs and put a chart in your packet to try to show how everybody is utilizing TIF, and I didn't find that anybody else was revenue sharing. Urban renewal law changed a few years ago to require revenue share, or at least some negotiations. DDA law did not change, so the DDAs that were already functioning just kept functioning.
And Hillary, can I add to that? One of the things that Hillary, Mark, and I are working on for Sean is basically a strategy and messaging in terms of how to approach the schools in Arapahoe County. And our message is going to be to, let's face it, we generally would like to avoid sharing and keep as much of that revenue as possible for the DDA. But we think there's a story about how positive the DDA and TIF is for both the county and schools. And so we need to basically pull that messaging together. So there'll probably be another piece like the one that you've seen on the TIF sub-district recommendations. And then we can engage with the county and the school representatives accordingly.
Right now, we're essentially at negative $200,000, right? So we don't have anything to share yet, anyway. Am I understanding that correctly?
We'll be at negative $200,000 at the end of the year, but yeah.
Right, yeah, okay. And then I think that we've gone over this before, but help me understand, Mark, if the city council approves, if we approve this resolution and then city council approves the resolution as well at the end of July, how long would you estimate it would be before we would actually be collecting revenue?
I believe that you will start seeing property tax increment sometime next year. Okay, and by sometime next year, I mean, it really, if you think about how your property taxes are paid, you have a choice, right? You can pay first half by the end of February and then the second half by the middle of June, or you can pay 100% of it in April, right? So then your check goes to the county treasurer then takes it and splits it up to all the different taxing authorities, of which the DDA will be one of them, right? And then they forward that money to the city, and the city will get it and report it to you, all right? So if they pay the first half, if all property owners pay first half taxes in February, let's say April or May, the DDA might get notified that it has some increment from property taxes, okay? So let's call it a 60-day to 90-day lag between when you pay it and when you get it. Does that sound reasonable, Brad? From a mechanic standpoint? So that's property taxes. Sales tax works a little bit different. When the city council activates the sales tax increment area, then the city will go look at the last 12 months from that date, so let's say it's July 1. So they'll look back to, what was that? July 1, yeah, July 2020, June 30th, 2020. July 2020. They'll look back and say, this is the number that you have to hit. And so then the city will start collecting sales tax increment from all these areas. And not until you go above that number will there be an increment generated, okay, on a month-to-month basis. And then July 1 of 2022, it starts over again at 0. And then you have to grab it, you have to work up. So I would expect that you likely wouldn't see any sales tax increment until May or June of next year at best, right? Months 11 or 12 is probably what it'll take to sort of reach that hurdle, because it doesn't look like there's substantial change coming in the retail environment over the next year. So it may be some organic growth that you see from recovery efforts, volumes kind of increasing, but I don't think there's like this big pop coming, that this high volume things that'll accelerate that substantially. And so I think you're looking at, and again, you'll have these mechanical issues, right? You fill out your sales tax remittance, so you know how this works. You complete a month, you then fill it out, you then send it in with your check, and then the city will process it, and then they'll have to tabulate whether any increment's been generated, and then they'll tell the DDA whether or not any increment has happened. So call that a 30 or 60-day lag as well. So I think you're looking at summer of next year before you really see any meaningful tax increment receipts between property and sales combined. So take action today, and next summer you might see some results. But that's
Right,
the
but
lag
what are
we're
we gonna
looking
do
at.
between January and summer of next year? That's a different conversation.
Well, some good things happen.
Great.
You know by the end of December what your incremental AV is, because the assessor will have done their work. You pay your property taxes in arrears, so in December, you will have some certainty around what that number is for the property tax increment. You haven't received it yet, but you know it's coming. And so you have several months to be able to sort of think through how to implement where you're going to use those dollars.
Well, and we do anticipate a loan agreement between the city and the EDDA, and if, with the hope for passage of the debt authorization amount, then, that would be allowed, and then the downtown plan would further secure that loan agreement with these TIF revenues. So the reality is probably the city would be asked to advance some funds under that loan agreement, but they'd be highly secured in terms of their repayment.
And one of the reasons that I think we really advocated for a property tax increment area starting right now is that it does give you some certainty. There is an ability to forecast with some certainty that there is some amount coming that you need to decide how you're going to utilize. The sales tax was a much cloudier picture for us. And so that would have been hard to say, go forth and do your work, hoping that in a year, money might have materialized.
Is there more to your presentation? Okay. Any discussion on there?
I just wanted to tell folks that those 3 pages, so since you all got the report in your original binders, so I can send an email that has these 3 pages, and the first page is a different number, so it's page 7. I'll put it in the email. The other 2 are correct, if that would be helpful.
Those are the 3 pages that have changes.
The 3 pages that have changes.
That'd be great.
I can send that out.
Any discussion about this resolution in front of us? Okay. Do we have a motion to adopt resolution 6, a resolution of the Englewood Downtown Development Authority recommending approval of a proposed plan of development to the city of Englewood?
I'll move to approve the resolution.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
All right. Member Calvert,
Yes.
member Gallego,
Yes.
member Reinhardt,
Yes.
Councilmember Sierra,
Yes.
and Chair Turkey.
Yes,
The motion is passed.
I think everything we've done so far has been unanimous. Let's keep it this way.
Can we get one of those little light boards, get a green and red light?
Okay, so moving on to number 6, new business. We'll talk about the ballot measure.
So you are considering a motion today that recommends to city council that they authorize a ballot measure regarding debt authorization for the November election. We're recommending that we set that authorization at the $80 million level like it was set last year, based on a number of things.
Hillary, can I just add one amendment to that? There's been a lot of internal discussion following Councilmember Anderson's comments on that and some of the other. And I think our emerging consensus is to reduce that to 70 million. I just think it feels right, and I think we'll have better council support and more support from the public. So, sorry.
Do you want to add any comments?
Yeah, so obviously Blake was there on Monday night as well as Brad. And so, yeah, some of the comments from council that night was, member Anderson voiced a concern in terms of just coming in at the same figure that was rejected the year before. And I guess his trepidation, the way that it sounded, was the fact that we're not taking that into consideration if we go back at an $80 million number, and we're basically not really listening to the voters in a sense and just trying to come back at that, not coming back at a lower amount. So this, I would agree that coming back at a lower number would probably make a lot of sense. It may help us convince council to, to approve the debt authorization. I know it's not the number that originally was wanted by this, or at least that was recommended initially. But I know that there's a lot that we can do. I think my greater concern is just making sure that we can get this onto the ballot.
Yeah.
And then actually having a conversation with all the voters about what the $70 million could do if that's the number that we decide on. So I do agree that going with the lower number could ease some of the concerns that we have within some of the body within council.
I think if lowering the number will get council to approve it, then it makes sense. But I think from a political standpoint, in terms of getting it passed, 50 million versus 80 million versus 100 million, when regular voters hear these numbers, they're huge. All of them are huge. And so they're voting based on a philosophy on whether or not we should go into debt versus what the actual number is. That's my sense. So I think that if we lower the number, we might be compromising the amount that we could get for no real gain. I think if someone is going to vote no, they're going to vote no, whether it's 50 million or whether it's 80 million. And if they're going to vote yes, they're going to vote yes, whether it's 50 million or 80 million.
Yeah, all I can say is we've had a lot of internal discussion even since Monday night about, different approaches. And, but I think if you look at it sequentially, making sure that we get the measure onto the ballot is the key. And I think reducing the number, it helps accomplish that. And it gives us, I think, a little bit of a better story to tell with the qualified electors too. Although I would agree with you in terms of the way they perceive it, but there's something there that we can talk about. And so in total, it seems like the right thing to do.
If we were to put forward 80 million and then can council change what we put forward?
Right, you're making a recommendation, and that's what I was gonna say. So this body can make no recommendation as to number, just say, yeah, please put a ballot issue on the ballot, a debt issue on the ballot. Or this body can recommend a specific number, but it's not binding on council. What ultimately will probably set the discussion at the council meeting is the draft ordinance, which we're working on the ballot issue language now. But there's nothing preventing council from amending that as it's presented to them. So let's say the draft ordinance comes to them showing 80, by motion and majority vote, they could choose to reduce it to 70 and still pass it. But the other scenario is that the internal minds of the city decide to present it at 70 and then it gets passed that way, so.
Yeah, we had the discussion last year where the amount was changed, and it just dilutes the message, I think, that the council sends to the voters, if there's been that kind of process versus a recommendation from the DDA and from staff, and then that's just incorporated into the ordinance, and that's what's voted on. I think that just is a stronger way to go.
So I'll share a sort of dissenting opinion, I guess. I've had some reservations about the timing of this ballot issue because I feel that it didn't pass. It was narrow, but it didn't pass. And if we wait until 2022, we may be able to use the money that we gathered from TIF and do some projects and say, here's what we did with a little. Now here's what we could do with a lot. And we had the opportunity to build trust and some, street cred, I guess, for lack of a better term, but credibility among the voters. We talked about that briefly, and I know you guys said that we may lose some momentum. I think was the word you used. I think there's a lot of excitement in the community, and it was so narrow that maybe we can make up the ground and get it passed this year. But I worry a little bit, and after listening to the council meeting, some of the council members said, why are we going to go back when we just asked them 5 minutes ago if they want to do this, and they told us no? So I'm a little bit hesitant about the timing. I think if this group wants to go forward with doing it this year, I think there's a lot of compelling reasons to do that, but I just wanted to put it out there as something to consider, because council may have the same opinion, which actually would be an argument for advancing the recommendation, and then council can say no if they want to. Anyway, I just wanted to share that thought.
But if it did not go through, I know we discussed what the numbers would be. I don't think we generate enough to really, it would just like self-fund the organization. It wouldn't fund any improvements, I don't think.
Well,
We'd maybe be in the black of just to fund what we're doing right now.
If we were able to operate on $500,000 a year as opposed to 200, we could do a few smaller projects, maybe not some grants, maybe leverage other funds with it, but you're right. We would not be in the position, we couldn't enter into any, multi-year financing agreements. We couldn't utilize bonds, bank loans, anything to fund larger projects. It would be year to year only.
Mm-hmm.
I understand what you're saying. I guess I still worry that we have excitement right now. People are choosing to move here. And they're enjoying what they're seeing so far, but there is belief that it's going to get better. And 2 years is a long time. Some people.
yeah, it's a long time to wait.
My concern is that if you step back and see maybe why did it not pass? And we were all in a state of fear. We were all in a state of shock. We didn't know what next week was going to bring. And so enthusiasm, I completely agree we need to capitalize on. And now we can actually go out and talk to people. I mean, I've already talked to about 5 different people who could have voted who didn't even know, and so if we can get out and speak to people, then I think that's a more accurate reflection of if it's what people want than maybe what happened last year. And as far as 80 or 70, whatever it takes to get it going, that's my thought. But how is it possible that with the way everything's going up in the world, we're about to ask for less? think it just, you know, if I was a voter and I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, you know, so was it a little bit of baloney that they wanted this much before, but now they say they're gonna do the same thing with less, but everything costs more? You know, to me, that just seems like they just want something, so just whatever we can do to get it.
Yeah.
So, you know, as a voter, that's how I would look at it.
You sound a lot like Mark. He says we should ask for more.
Yeah, everything's more right now. How can this be less?
Well, and that's my concern, because we deal with construction and these kind of improvements every day. And yes, everything is more expensive, they're just going up. And then we're in an urban location, and so it's different from if you're building these type of improvements in Castle Rock or Parker or, you know, Douglas County suburban areas where new greenfield developments coming in. Urban areas are very difficult to come in, even the paseos and the pedestrian improvements. That's going to be complicated to bring in a traffic professional to the signal timing, potentially rip up the curb and gutter and the pavement to get a new safety feature. It's just, everything's expensive. And yes, it's going up and skyrocketing with what's going on with COVID right now. And so that's my hesitation. I think I'm comfortable with saying we need to further the initiative, and that's what's most important, to get momentum going somewhere. But that's my concern, is I'm worried that 80 million isn't going to be enough. It's a very big number, and I realize that for the taxpayers, but it's not going to be enough to make the impact. And you look at like what Fort Collins has done. I mean, they're up at 150 million here, if I'm reading that correct. And what they've done, it's remarkable up there. So, but we got to start somewhere. So
And
that's
I
right.
do think there's that argument that if we go with the smaller number and get things rolling, it's a much easier to sell on the second authorization.
Mhm.
You know, and if we don't get things rolling, it doesn't really matter.
Right. I mean, we have to be the salespeople to really educate. the
Well, and
voters.
and you are salespeople, and that didn't exist last time. You know, I think that's a really big difference that's probably hard to quantify, is at that point in time, they had 4 ballot questions before them. None of them were certain. They gave you yeses on 2, which allowed this board to form, and now you're functioning, you're actually a thing. And it might be less daunting to approve debt for something that has faces and, you know, is seeming real.
Well, and also the fact that one of the questions was a mill levy increase, right?
Right.
And so asking for a mill levy, I always wonder whether or not people were tying in the mill levy increase with the debt authorization and seeing them as one and the same. And so that's a question I have. I do have concerns. I understand where everyone's coming from in terms of a lower number and the fact that, yeah, materials, labor, everything's going up. But I do have concerns about this measure passing at 80 million with whatever within council.
You need the council authorization.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, the debt authorization.
that's the reality. That's our first reality right there.
What if some of us went to council and talked about it?
Well,
You know, like we just did?
so I do like the fact that when Hillary, you came and spoke, when you both spoke on Monday night, I think you're talking about a pre-approval. And the fact that we may be asking for 80 million or 70 million, whatever happens to be the fact, but council still has to approve whatever these projects are.
Yeah.
So I also wonder when we're looking at, I know that we have an example here within one of the charts about what type of projects could happen with the 80 million. I'm sure that some council members are looking at it saying, no, I don't agree with that going on there. Why do you need 80 million when I don't agree with that
Yeah.
being part of the project? So I do like the fact that if we, it does make sense maybe that we have a conversation, or members of this EDDA come forward and speak to council about some of, you know, why the 80 million may be more important. But also just emphasize the fact that ultimately city council still has to approve what projects are gonna move forward with the EDDA.
With a caveat, I mean, city council would have to approve by ordinance bond issuance, but they're not necessarily gonna approve every action.
Not every, yes, correct.
Right, so
Correct.
a bond issuance would be daylighted by an ordinance, and that would be have full council. Is there any reason to think Councilmember Anderson is speaking for multiple others?
Kind of.
I think it's a possibility.
I tried to do a count, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, do you think there's a number in between those 2 numbers that would be offensive?
between the 70 and the 80.
Mm-hmm.
78.
I think I played-
79.
I think I played this, yeah, I played this game with my son. So.
79.
Can I maybe add just another wrinkle to these deliberations? I was hired originally to think about city center. All right, that was the only thing that I was thinking about was the redevelopment of city center. And of course, you can't really do that without thinking about the whole DPA. And so when I think about the debt authorization number, I think about really two buckets. There's what might be necessary for city center, and there's what's necessary for everything else. And so if we were to think about a $20 million number, okay, just something that could be very tolerable and low, right? Just to get things going, to be able to enter into multi-fiscal year contracts and to get some of the other things going. I think that really hamstrings the city being able to solicit a developer, because they would say, wait, I have to go out for another debt authorization because 20 million, I could chew all that up in a week talking about storm sewer and streets. And that doesn't get me anything to house cars or to go vertical. And so the 20 million might be great to start some of these projects across the DDA that you would need to harness that initial funding streams that we're talking about turning on. If you go 50 million, you know, the early underwriting that was done for the master developer suggested that they could use every bit of that. And now there's not any money for all the other stuff that the DDA wants to do. So I guess my point is if we pick a compromise number that is low enough to be palatable for whomever the audience is, it might be so low that it doesn't really help you. Because somebody who needs to think about $50 or $60 million of bond proceeds to help a big master development would say, well, you might be able to help me on phase 1, but now I can't even do phase 2 until I go to another debt authorization election. And so because I can't see a path to doing the entire development, I don't want to do any of it because I'm going to be saddled with land that I can't do anything with until I have a future election outcome 5 years from now. And that's too much risk for me to buy land today. So I feel like if I were recommending to this board any kind of action, it would be go small or go big. But trying to split the baby in the middle, I think may actually end up being a fight that you ultimately win, but you lose because the thing you were trying to enable, it didn't get you far enough. And then the last piece to that is we have asked for some feedback based on what we heard Monday night from the development sector and said, what do you think would happen if this body said we get $70 million approval, we're going to take 20 and set it aside for our operations and things that have nothing to do with city center, and we'll reserve 50 for what you need. What's your reaction to that? And so hopefully we can get some private sector indication on whether they think that's awesome, we would go forward with it, in which case I think we all breathe a sigh of relief because we can maybe make everybody happy. But this debt authorization is a moment in time that is trying to give you the flexibility for the next 30 years. The next time you go out for a debt authorization, I worry that is because there's a specific project on the ballot or in the works that you need to take action for, and then the election becomes a public debate on the merits of that project. It has nothing to do with thinking big anymore. It has to do with, do I like the architecture? Do I like that person? Do I like that land use? When people vote up and down on that, that to me feels hard.
We've seen how that goes in the city already. That's a really important point. We don't want to get in that position. I mean, who knows what the council composition will be at that point, but if it's anything like that.
But if you take all this, Mark, and you put it in a blender today, at our moment in time, that the board is trying to do, a recommendation to council. I mean, if you take everything we know, doesn't 70 million seem like the best path?
Maybe. What's really hard, Dan, is what you
I
don't
know.
know, right? If, even if we said 70 and 70 was the number that worked, and you guys chew up 65 of that in the next 4 or 5 years as city center happens, and as you do all your initiatives in the medical district, and we have awesome stuff happen on Broadway. I don't know what the next thing is that you go, oh, 15 is not enough, we have to go get our debt cap raised. And how far out is far enough out to be comfortable for you? Is it 30 years? Is it 10 years? That's really a hard question to wrestle with this group.
Well, the other aspect that concerns me about all this is this, we're just running out of time. And to me, if we had more time, maybe we can bring up these points and educate council about why the importance of a bigger, just a bigger number. You know, our first meeting was at the end of April. We've had, 2 meetings since then. We have to get this, the debt authorization is gonna be on the July 6th meeting.
Yeah,
It has to go to 2 readings, so then we have to get it on again on the 19th. We just don't have that much time, unfortunately.
no, and even if you did, we'd still be having this conversation.
We probably still would,
in one
but-
way or the other.
Yeah, but it's just, to me, unfortunately, we're just like where we're at and kind of constrained.
Sam, I wasn't at the meeting, could make it, but did it get discussed that it only didn't pass by 9 votes?
Yeah.
Did that come up? Yeah.
Has the composition of the qualified electors changed significantly since the last election?
I wouldn't think so,
Basically the
no.
same, right?
I do think we have, because of just general conditions, that we have a better chance of involving more voters and more voters who would tend to vote positively.
Okay. So we need a motion, but we have to decide what amount to put in.
Well, the motion maker can make a motion, and put
Right.
something in.
We can have a motion to amend.
Or nothing in, I mean, it's at your pleasure.
Well, I'll bring it up. I guess I'll make the motion to amend the motion to allow a debt authorization of $70 million.
And there's no motion to amend, so you'd be making. the-
Oh, okay, well, there, make a motion for the debt authorization of $70 million.
Do we have a second? Okay, there's no second. Do we have another motion?
I have a motion to make it for 90. And I know that that's counter argument to everything that we've said. I just want to say it for a moment, because again, where are we going? I mean, if 70 is going to make it, then and we think that it's going to happen, great, but it just seems like we're handicapping ourselves. And if, I just feel like we're just handicapping ourselves.
I'll second that motion. So we have a motion and a second to recommend that the city council authorize a ballot measure regarding debt authorization in the amount of 90 million for the November 2nd, 2021 election. Can I have a vote?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can you explain to me again what happens? This goes back to city council, what happens?
They vote on whether to authorize the election into the specific ballot language for the election, plugging in, whatever number.
Right, so they can change this number, the
But-
number's kind of arbitrary then?
Yeah, I mean, here's how the actual steps. It gets reported to city council that this motion was passed, if it does, and then the powers that be in the city still decide what to generate for the draft ordinance that goes before city council, and then that information is explained to them at the time, probably through a staff memo or something that says, hey, the EDDA recommended this amount, the draft ordinance shows this amount, council, it's your, at your will, and then the ordinance itself, setting the actual ballot issue is passed. So this is a very preliminary step.
But the action that they could take is if the increase is an insult, that they could decline to put it on the ballot. Is that what we
We
want?
get voted down.
Right, and then we're stopped.
And so procedurally, I don't know, can I say anything?
Can we still
mean,
have discussion now that there's a motion? in the
I don't
second?
know.
Yeah, that is one discussion, yeah.
So I would really strongly recommend, and I appreciate it. Because that's been a lot of our conversation internally too, but the threshold is, let's get it on the ballot.
Well, there can be a follow-up motion.
Well, we went through that last year, and Nathaniel, I don't know what you think, but if we have to go through that again, where there's a discussion about different amounts, I think we'll fragment the council. It won't be nearly as strong of a message. You know, we've been drafting a council memo that was focused on 70 million and referencing what we thought was gonna be the scenario of the board recommending 70. That's a pretty powerful recommendation.
I gotta
Council.
disagree. This is an appointed body, appointed to make their views heard. And if council wants to hear 90 and disregard it, that's up to them. But I don't think we try to orchestrate it so carefully behind the scenes that it's not.
No, I'm referencing kind
organic.
of our history from last year.
Sure, but if this is the will of this body, I think
Sure.
that needs to be reported to council, and then they're fully empowered to do what they see fit.
What if, this is probably a question for you, Nathaniel, but if we had every member of this board and Mark and Hillary and Dan all speak, and Brad, anybody who wants to speak in favor of this and explain our rationale for why we would be asking for more this time? Do you think that would be helpful? Or do you think they would be like, we don't care?
No, they obviously would take into consideration, obviously you are voting members of, everybody here would be voting as part of this debt authorization, you are actual voters of it. So I think they're definitely gonna take this into consideration. So it would help.
Would it help if there were other qualified electors who were not members of this board that came and spoke in support?
Potentially, yes, it's another voter, it's another constituent.
But you also have to remember, I mean, we had a nice big chunk of time to talk about this Monday evening. We rarely get that kind of time these days. We'll have like maybe 10 minutes.
So we can come to public comment.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, it's like you're limited to 5 minutes per person during public comment. If you call ahead of time.
And this is at the July 6th meeting?
Correct.
So close to the holiday.
Yeah.
And what's the likelihood if we even said 70 that they would come back with 60? I mean, is 70 something that felt pretty good? It feels pretty good.
Did we toss around numbers that
No,
night? I
there
don't believe there
wasn't
were.
much.
No, I
Joe
just
did.
mentioned 50.
He mentioned 65 or 70. And I don't know, I felt like there was a good vibe at 70.
I think it might be more persuasive to have what you could do with 90, if that's the recommendation. And Meryl reminded me that it's also possible if you wanted to submit something in writing along with your recommendation, that could be communicated to city council.
Like explaining the things that you said about why. Because 80, you're just doing 80 because you did it last time, right?
Right, I mean, and at this
No,
point,
we're
wouldn't.
tying it to projected costs here, I mean.
Oh, yeah,
It's
yeah.
not just kind of.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but-
And
but
that's
what
just
I-
responding to what you said about
Yeah,
the
but what I'm-
changes that make
yeah.
it higher. You haven't.
And it's just my
Rationale.
concern is that, what 80 got us last year isn't gonna get what 80 gets us this year.
That's
Yeah, and so that's just my.
And I like what Mark was saying about how this is our opportunity to think big and say, if we want to think big, let's do it. Let's go big or go home. And we can say that to council as well. And council's just putting it in the hands of the voters. They're not saying, yes, we're going to do this. They're just saying, yeah, you can ask the voters if you want to. I don't know, I feel like we can persuade them, but I'm the eternal optimist.
I totally hear what you're saying. I mean, I see both sides. Again, I'm concerned from just the cost escalation and if I want it to be the best impact that we can make it have and everything, but knowing also what we deal with on the entitlement side and going to councils and selling the project, I just worry about that we'll stop the whole process and then we'll have no project. And then like Mark's saying, what we're really trying to do is get the city center going, and projects, getting those ramped up and then the developer aligned. I mean, it's like 1 in a million
Right.
to make all this stuff, the timing work out. I mean, look at the Gates redevelopment that's up there at Broadway and I-25. It was kind of queued up pre-recession in 2008. And because everything fell apart, the financial system fell apart, the property is mostly just sit there forever. And there's plenty of other redevelopment sites in urban areas that if you don't get the stars to align, it's just gonna sit there and nothing's gonna happen. So this is our one opportunity. So again, valid arguments all the way around, but if 70 million crosses the finish line, I mean, that's where I do think I could support that, just to get started, get momentum, because we're gonna be selling this even after.
Yeah.
I mean, we're gonna be the ambassadors for all this stuff to happen, and so it's just the beginning of our work.
Well, and just a couple last comments on top of that. We have 2 big agreements at City Center. One is the pre-development agreement with SKB. The other one is the framework agreement with LNR, which is coming up later in July too. And both of them are teed into the debt authorization question. So it's really critical. I mean, we have a bit of a house of cards there that could kind of fall apart if we don't get this moving forward. The other thing I'll just say is that the debt authorization covers multi-year fiscal obligations. And, and that covers a lot of the day-to-day business of the EDDA. So it's not just the issuance of bond issues, it's what can the EDDA do to function on a day-to-day basis.
And all that needs to go in your memo to council,
It
explaining
does.
to them why they
It's
should
it.
approve. Yeah, so I think, does council know that those 2 developers are waiting with bated breath to know whether there's the authorization? So those seem to me to be compelling reasons why council wouldn't want to shoot itself in the foot by not putting this on the ballot.
Dan has come prepared to give you guys an overview of the city center redevelopment situation. Would you like to take in that information and then revisit this topic so that you
We've
know?
got the motion pending, so I think we
Okay.
probably shouldn't move on until we have a vote on it. And
Or to delay the motion, or to pull back the motion.
well, once it's made and seconded, it really we need to have a vote on it. Even if it's a no vote, it can always be brought back.
The person who moved it can't withdraw their motion if they want to.
I suppose they can, and then with the consent of the second, I just tend to like to avoid all that kind of shenanigans and just have a clean record of motion, second vote, and then we know what happened. But that's your call.
So we can just vote no now.
Well, vote of your will now.
But if we vote no on that motion, then can somebody make a motion later in the meeting for a different amount
Even for the same amount.
or the same amount?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll make a quick comment. I'm gonna be voting no on the current motion. Just based off of my inkling with council on how they would take a $90 million authorization.
Okay.
And I'd like to comment too, I think I would be voting no. Being there Monday night, I think I'm worried about the message that it sends. Even though I'm supportive of going up, I'm worried about the message that it sends, and it defeats being kind of united and within the spirit of the feedback we got Monday night.
So
I just want to say that I'm torn. I feel like we were asked to come together as a group to think big, and now we're being told, don't think that big. And that's frustrating, but we need something. And it feels like we're already having to play the game, and that's disappointing. But for the 90 million, I will tell you that I will vote no too, just because I'm afraid we'll get nothing.
okay. So should we call the vote then? Does that count as a no? Just, do we have to
No,
actually?
you do have to do the roll.
Okay.
So everyone understands what we're voting on, right?
Mhm.
Thank you. Okay. All right.
No,
Member Graves,
I'll say no, I respect what the feedback has been.
member Reinhardt. No. Councilmember Sierra
No.
and Chair Zimmerman.
Yes.
4 nays, 1 aye. The motion does not pass.
Okay, so next on the agenda is the homelessness, economic development. The greater. Hillary,
Madam
I
Chair,
think-
Yeah,
just-
one point where if there is a desire to continue this discussion, we can stay on this topic and another motion can be made.
Oh, we can,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, I'm not sure that you
I don't have to move on
move
yet.
on, yeah, I'm not sure that the
Okay.
discussion's over. And if other people want to
Thank
make
you.
other motions, yeah.
Would we need to say that we're moving the, I don't know the vote on that.
You can stay on this item as long as you.
No,
So-
city center, she was saying they want to discuss.
Well, so if you want to bring in additional information, then I don't think we actually have to like move on to another agenda item, we're just giving them information.
Okay,
We could move up item 6E if we wanted to.
Yeah.
Okay.
okay,
Okay.
yeah, let's move to 6E then.
So that's you.
Well,
Is
let me,
that- can I revamp this, or how about,
Yeah.
what if we do this, what if I simplify this? Can you just tell us more information about city center as part of
Yes.
this discussion?
yeah,
please?
I think that's
There we go.
perfect.
Perfect.
Because you don't need a lot of background, because I really hit the essence of it. Which is we're really fortunate where we are right now in that we have these two parties that we've dealt with for a long time that control almost half of the total city center and certainly the heart of it. And so we got them moving in the right direction. And the redevelopment kind of teed up through the tactics of these two agreements. Both agreements are related to the DDA data authorization. So it's critical. And in fact, you know, it's just the absolute truth that if there isn't a debt authorization, our current master developer, SKB, will leave. They've said that, it's in their agreement in essence. And the problem is we can go out and procure another developer, but unless we have the public financing in place, they're gonna have the same issue. It's gonna be, we can't pay for all the needed public improvements that are necessary to kickstart the redevelopment of city center. And it includes, you know, a lot of redo of the plaza area, the Englewood Parkway. It includes some extent of a new garage. So just things that are necessary to set the base for redevelopment. And then, you know, we have part of the framework agreement with LNR is that they will sell 4 key pieces of their property to the city's master developer, SKB. And so that, you know, is consistent with the city's vision, which is we want to tie these two properties together and achieve something bigger. So long story short, we need the debt authorization to finance the public improvements. And if we don't have it, things will lose a hell of a lot of momentum. And so it's just, you know, it's just absolutely critical. I will say, Diane, to your point, you know, when we started this discussion a year ago, I mean, and Mark was really part of this, there were a lot of people who said, gosh, we can't ask for any debt at this point. We can't, you know, I mean, and then when we got the numbers up, you know, we're inching them up and people said, you'll never get that approved in Englewood, you know, and Mark came along and said, oh, yeah, at least consider 150 million. And we actually had a very legitimate conversation with council. We framed it between 40 and 50 and arrived at 80. And it was, I mean, a lot of people thought that was just a miracle, you know, to actually have a number that was that high. And you got to remember, it comes along with the fully loaded Tabor amount, which was 216 million. People actually saw that on the ballot measure, you know. So to get as close as we did and putting all 4 ballot questions together was really complicated in the midst of COVID. To actually get the DBA approved and the expenditure and collection of TIF approved, and to lose this one, Measure C, by only 9 votes, was really a miracle. So I'm really optimistic that we can get the public vote we need, but we gotta get them to vote on it. And I would still feel quite positive about a $70 million number, because it's so far beyond where we started. And the other thing is it lets us, I think, get enough going in a, call it a 3 to 5 year period that, if it's done right, we can go back to those voters. There's only like 1,500 of them. And we can ask again and say, look at what we've been able to achieve so far, And
Asking a question again from a position of success would be easier than the first.
And the other thing is it doesn't increase, it doesn't increase their taxes, doesn't increase their risk. It's really an authorization for debt of the DDA secured by tax increment revenues. So no, it doesn't increase taxes and or risk for residents of Englewood. It seems to me it's a pretty ultimately easy ask if we have some momentum going. So just by way of background, and if we're successful, City Center can be a really good generator of tax increment revenue going forward that'll benefit all of downtown. And we need that, because if we don't, that'll just kind of have an anchor effect on what we have to work with. So that's my quick pitch.
Dan, has SKB stated to you like where they would start if we were to get a debt authorization? Like what would be initial projects that they would start kicking off?
We had a meeting with them yesterday. They're really kind of re-engaging in the planning process with Triba, which was really good to see. And they said that what they would attempt to do is bring a couple other vertical developers in with them, and they envision it being a hotel project and kind of a 55+ retirement project in conjunction with what they want to do, which is a multifamily building that would probably be on top of a parking structure. So they're looking at the idea of getting a lot of activity going early. And then the key for them is reconfiguring the public plaza area and making that kind of a festival retail street that is adjacent to that longstanding unreleased retail in the Western Arwalk building, and really activating that space in there.
So that would be their phase 1.
Yeah, they would.
Potentially, so hotel, the over 55, and a separate multifamily. And is that separate from the 350 that would take over the?
I was just gonna say the LMR property, the Office Depot, Harbor Freight, that could be a second multifamily.
That's a second multifamily. So then
Fairly early.
the parking structure that you mentioned, then I'm assuming that hotel would take over the current parking structure that's in place.
I think a good question. I think the current parking structure gets torn down.
Right.
It's had its life.
So it's basically replacing that new parking structure, is replacing the current parking structure.
And then part, in there also is our assumption that we're going to achieve pretty significant reduction in the RTV shared parking, because all signs are kind of pointing to that.
Right.
Maybe another area.
It's also fair to say we still have a fair amount of discussions with them to have around the fate of the city in terms of what our space needs would be. Would it be consolidated? Would it be dispersed? Would we become mini anchors throughout the site? That still needs that.
And the reason why I'm asking these questions is this: one of the issues that I happen to have, and this is just me personally, is just trying to figure out how we prioritize what projects we would work on as a DDA with this debt authorization. So when we're talking about thinking big, that's where this parking structure is coming in, right? The new parking structure that we're talking about is replacing an old parking structure. So we do need to have a parking structure in place.
Right.
And I think that this is something that's been missing as part of the council meetings is just identifying where exactly, what projects we're gonna prioritize for our first phase, second phase, third phase. Obviously, we need to work in conjunction with what SKP and LNR and all that property is gonna be at, what they're gonna be doing. So that's been one of the missing pieces. That may be one of the conversation pieces that may be beneficial as part of the debt authorization conversation on the 6th. Is just identifying, this is what we mean by going big, and this is why we're talking about a bigger dollar amount, because we have to replace an existing parking structure. We need to, improve that
Yeah.
sale area. These are the items that we're seeing as part of a bigger authorization.
Yeah, I think we can do that as part of our council memo, and any presentation is really focused where the early DDA debt authorization
Right.
dollars go.
When does this board make those decisions though?
I think it's tough for us to make those decisions until we know what we're dealing with, right? This is what I would recommend on that, is that in our current memo, we just say, we're trying to get funding so that then we can prioritize, once we know what we have to work with. And then shortly after we have an idea of what we're gonna have to work with, we get together and have a special meeting that lasts all day long, and we work on prioritizing what we want to do and how it aligns with our downtown plan and all of that. That's what I would think, because I worry, this is something that you mentioned before, Mayor Pro Tem, about if Joe Anderson, for example, sees a parking structure in our list of suggestions or priorities, he's going to say, nope, I hate parking, I'm out. I don't want to approve this. I mean, maybe. So I worry that that's just an example.
Right.
If we were to put specific projects forward, they may start voting on this, whether or not they like that project, rather than whether or not they like the idea of letting us have money to do creative things in downtown.
And to be clear, this is a public parking structure that would be used for all the retail and services, okay.
What's the status of the agreement with SK? I mean, it's already been approved by council.
The pre-development agreement with them was just recently extended essentially through the end of the year, contingent on the DDA debt authorization. And then the framework agreement with LNR is coming up, I believe, on July 19th for council review and approval.
So mechanically, how would SKB tie into the EDDA for? Just the EDDA's debt authorization? And if SKB wants to use it, how does that work?
Well, I'll let, you want to take that one, Mark?
Yeah, I think before this body got constituted, it was all just the city talking to the developer, right? And we plan to set this DDA up and all that. So there is an expectation, I would say, on SKB's part, that they will be able to arrive at terms with the DDA on being able to utilize the public finance tools to help for redevelopment. And then, you know, I said this earlier, but I just want to piggyback on what Dan said as far as the debt authorization. This body has that determination to make on how it prioritizes and how it carves up things and what is available within whatever debt authorization is approved, right? SKB gets to decide if that's enough for them. So having the debt authorization is really important, right? That's sort of a threshold issue. Then if they say, well, I need 50 of it carved out for me. And we say, well, we only got 50 approved and we've got other things we want to do with it. That's where they now have a decision to make. And so I just want to make sure we're all clear that debt authorization is great as long as it's big enough to accomplish everybody's goals. And so that's why we've asked for feedback from them that the direction looks like it's 70. If 60 is what's available for you guys, and we're not making any commitments on the DDA's behalf at this point, but is 60 enough to where you're interested in continuing to move forward? Because if they say no to that, I think then you guys might want to go down to 20, because Dan has to go find a new master developer.
Can you talk about the metro district on City Center as well, and how that plays into the financing?
Sure, so the early concept is that when SKB buys the land, they will put a Title 32 special district on it. And so they'll pay higher taxes. They will tax themselves and future property owners higher than the rest of the city. And they will pledge that mill levy to a bond issue. So original construct is the DDA issues bonds and it uses its mill levy from the city center tax increment area sales and property. And it uses a pledge of the new special districts mill levy, and that's the revenue stream that repays the bonds. Another legal question that we have is, well, what if it worked in reverse? What if the DDA pledged its city center increment to the Met District and the Met District is the issuer? How does that impact the debt authorization? So we're trying to understand if there are options there based on whatever the the politically palatable ballot question wording is, the dollar amount. Do we have options inside of that, or is it a hard cap? It doesn't matter who's the issuer, whatever that dollar amount is counts against our debt authorization. So we're just trying to explore possibilities at this point.
And so it's envisioned that we'll continue to come back to you all with the findings and recommendations. And that, there'll be a number of meetings with SKB representatives talking to the EDDA board about what their plans are and, how much they need and why it makes sense. And, that conversation will need to take place in detail.
As just some perspective, since we talked garage as a specific project, a rough rule of thumb is about 20,000 per space. So again, a 400 space garage, that would be a multi-use for all the visitors and shoppers and retail uses, would be about an $8 million plus starting project. So I mean, that's where a garage is attainable. I mean, certainly there's a bunch more infrastructure, but garages are expensive. And
Does that go out to put residents above it?
yes, then there's other structural components.
And the idea would be to design a garage in a way where it's used by the different uses that surround it or can sit above it.
And it's financed by the different uses.
Yeah.
So in other words, the apartment owners or apartment tenants are gonna be paying for that portion of the garage. We wouldn't do that part.
Mhm.
So it'd be a blend of public and private investment.
It's a shared facility.
Yeah.
And for what I understand, again, I don't know the full structure, but like Streets of South Glen, if you use that as kind of a model, you go over there and it's a very similar where I think the city of Centennial partnered in a lot of their garages because they have 2 that are shared with the library and 2 that are shared with residents and stuff and the businesses for all the restaurant, retail and office that they have there. So again, this is kind of common, I guess, in projects like this.
RTD too often shares. Jurisdictions can upsize and RTD will pay for what they intended to. But would you say, Blake, have you worked with master developers? In projects like this, are they, just to give the board a general sense, is it common to go through more than one, or is it usually like a one shot?
When you say more than one,
Well, like, would it be uncommon to have a pre-development agreement and then they disengage because it's not working out? Turn to another master developer.
yeah, it's common. I mean, we've got a project that's another redevelopment site of an old landfill in Castle Rock right now, where there's a master developer in place, but because of the negotiations with the town of Castle Rock, they keep finding different users to potentially come in, and there's been some unbelievable users that they've had from medical, retail, big box type stuff, and because they can't get on the same page and get it all timed up with when they could deliver the property, they walk away immediately.
Yeah, and just from my work with URAs, often the master developer is tied to certain users, and so if those users are not going to be compatible, then the developer walks away. Just to give you an idea.
So we could end up losing SKB even if we get the 70 million debt authorization.
It's possible, but the thing is, we collectively, the DDA as well as the city, would be in a much better situation because at that point we'd have our rezoning done, we'd have the public finance tools in place, and still a cooperative agreement, I would say, at least in part with LNR. So we would have a lot of pieces that we could go to the market with. The other thing that's going to happen is that LNR will be marketing portions of the former Wine Garden property nationally. And we could ride their coattails in terms of finding another master developer in that context. So, everything we're doing protects the interests of downtown and the city in the event that SKB might, not proceed.
And I can't say I've been involved in like the financials, but with a developer, when they're trying to look at the risk, they're really looking for alignment. And so whether we get to the perfect dollar amount, that's where possibly there's a risk that they could walk away. But if there's not agreement and alignment from the city and the DDA to get the projects done, they're gonna say this is too much risk and we're gonna be hanging out there 5 years when we really need stuff to happen, so they move on.
And we did a really thorough job selecting SKB. The council vetted them extensively. And the other thing that's, I think, positive here is that their role is to serve as a master developer. If they elect to do certain vertical projects, that's great, but they're there to kind of quarterback things and pull in other vertical developers. And we're starting to see that they're getting some good alignment with vertical developers. I mean, they're actually expressing excitement about a hotel being able to be in an early piece. So
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece here, is that SKB is at worst a proxy for private development, right? And so the feedback that they give us is really valuable. It's not necessarily that we want to keep them in the deal if we can, because that'd be great, because they're miles ahead of anybody else from an execution standpoint. But I think every time you hear SKB talked about, it's not to keep SKB in the deal, it's that they are a proxy for private investment. And so it's great feedback that we hear from them. And so that's why we want, when we say, well, SKB might want this, SKB might want that, just think about it as private sector might want this or that. Market. And so we've talked a lot about, should we just get rid of these guys at this point because they're pissing us off about something? No, the answer is we want that feedback loop, and we need it, and we hope we can reach a deal, because we'll just see change happen that much faster because they are so much further ahead in their thinking about the site. But I just want to be clear that it's not sort of a please keep SKB.
Yeah, good, really
It's
good
let's
one.
keep the economics to where we can create a successful deal.
And you're not making representations to SKB or other developers about how much tax increment financing they're going to get. Right?
No, they're making assumptions on their part that if we generate this, we should have the borrowing capacity to use it. Okay, so that's the early underwriting that they're doing. They have an assumption that if they're generating a certain amount of tax increment, they should be able to use it to invest in their development. And what we have said is, if that's not what's going to happen, we need to communicate that to them, because they have a flawed assumption. And so there has been not specifics talked about there, because we haven't been able to talk specifics with this group about that deal.
So my understanding is project-specific TIF deals can't be done within a DBA context.
I think that we should talk about that, because I think they can be administratively within the DDA. But yes, we've talked about how we have sub areas.
Project-specific areas within the TIF area is not aligned with DDA statute, to my understanding. So we got stuff to work through here. I just want to make sure that this board has a clear discussion of its priorities and a clear understanding of what is needed to make a major redevelopment like this happen, and the role of public finance. That's why I wanted to have this presentation today. But it doesn't seem like we're going to have the full presentation.
Okay. And we can't wait for their feedback anyway. We have to decide right now what dollar amount we want to recommend if we're gonna do that. So I think for the purposes of moving along on the agenda, we should probably entertain another motion if there is one.
And the motion, as I said this before, but it doesn't have to include a dollar amount. You could just generally support the idea of the debt. That makes sense.
I think we should put a dollar amount in.
So too. Well, I'd like to make a motion and basically go back to what Councilmember Sierra suggested, is to recommend 70 million. I do agree that there's a need for more, but again, I'm really focused on that alignment and getting momentum. I feel like it's imperative, and again, I feel like if we make that gesture for what the discussion was Monday, it'll show that we're being a partner and not being combative, I guess, and stuff, and then we'll pick our battles. We may need to be fighting for some things in the future, so I think this is one I can relent on a little bit and get it on the ballot.
I'll second.
We have a motion to recommend that the city council authorize a ballot measure regarding debt authorization in the amount of $70 million for the November 2nd, 2021 election.
Member Calvert,
Yes.
Member Eagles,
Yes.
Member Reinhardt. Yes. Member Sierra,
Yes.
Member Murphy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, marketing, oh no, sorry, we're on 6B, economic development, the Greater Englewood Chamber of Commerce Forum on Homelessness.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise your awareness that the chamber's doing a forum tomorrow on homelessness as it relates to downtown areas. And there is a proposal coming up through the city to use economic recovery funds to create a multi-service area for people experiencing homelessness. Not specifically in the core downtown, but near it, and I'm not sure of the exact location, and it might be combined with some supported housing. And so we need to understand how people who currently can't afford any housing in the city are going to be housed. So you can sign up for that if you want. It's tomorrow, actually, tomorrow morning. I think it'll be informative.
Okay, marketing update.
I sent you guys an email the other night. We've launched the website, the email tool, the Facebook page, and a print newsletter was sent to about 1,500 downtown electors, so people who own property, businesses, and residents who are registered to vote in Colorado. So we are public now.
The materials look fantastic. I mean, we all in the city just love what we're seeing. I mean, you should be really proud of it. It's unbelievable. So, nice job.
I received it in the mail and loved it. That was really, I did a great job on that. And congratulations on the award for everybody here who was involved in that. That was, that's awesome.
That's a great way to start out. It really is.
I want to just add too that I really like, I don't know if it's intentional to rename the medical district to the wellness district, or I
Yeah,
really like that.
I'm glad to hear you say that. because I did kind of make the recommendation and I forgot to circle back with you. The downtown plan does recommend that we market the medical district as sort of healthy living and wellness as major themes, because it's more inclusive of the mix of businesses in the area and the growing residential population that's moving in.
but there's just one downside. There can't be any central utility plants in the
You know
wellness
what,
district.
we're not going there today, Dan. There better be one, or we won't have any power to do what we do, so just where it's at, still negotiable.
Big hamster wheel, we'll all
Part of the wellness plan.
Did everyone receive the email newsletter? Yes.
Yeah.
I've heard positive things at least once a day since the mailing went out, as far as someone
Good.
contacting my office or coming in to say something.
That's awesome.
What kind of comments?
Mostly just, oh, this is great. I mean, there's been a lot of that. Patients are, commenting, hey, I saw you there, so people are looking at it, people are reading it, so
Oh, yeah, you guys all look great in that thing.
Did you have more on marketing?
Nope.
Okay, placemaking in public spaces.
We are resubmitting our CDOT grant application based on more input that we gathered from business owners around the Paseo Crosswalk project last week. They were really, willing to participate and give us their ideas. Some of the new elements are, moving the pedestrian lights in the West Paseo, so where Brewability and Zomo are, over to the East Paseo where there's no lighting at all now. Okay, it's a very dark area, a lot of nuisance behavior is occurring in the East Paseo. Enhancing landscape in that area, building in a wheelchair charging station, and working kind of with Craig to figure out what the specifications of that are, but we want to enhance accessibility throughout the core downtown area, and that plaza is a good place to offer that service. Do you want to add anything?
I would just, it just can't be wheelchair. You have people with scooters and it's a different charging mechanism. So if we're going to do something like that, which of course we love, it needs to be really inclusive of all types of mobility options that need to be charged.
Okay.
We're gonna do that.
Okay, well then we'll.
I sent an
chat
email
more.
to you.
Yeah, I saw that, I haven't seen it all yet. Bicycle racks in both locations. What else? What else?
Could I ask a question about that? Would it be within the Paseo itself?
It's the west, what are you talking about, the charging station?
No, the bike racks.
On both sides, both
Okay.
Paseos, yeah. The grant criteria are all around increasing pedestrian safety, multimodal options and accessibility as it relates to, people being able to come to Main Street businesses. So we're looking at enhancing both Paseos as well as the crosswalk. So we would like to repaint the crosswalk, maybe add some, enhance the signal itself. In some ways, we're not sure how that can go yet. Maybe add a raised ridge on either side of the sidewalk where someone who is seeing impaired can feel it with their cane. We actually have a population of people with sight impairments downtown. What else? Oh, string lighting over the West Paseo. So taking out the poles that have never really worked for them and doing string lighting instead. And then we are advocating to allow the restaurants in the area to keep their outdoor patio spaces. So the idea is for it to be a more lively place for them to program, have power for live music and things like that, but also create more options for people to come to the downtown area, whether they're walking, riding a bike, using a stroller, using a wheelchair, or coming on the bus. CDOT has told me they would like to fund the project. I just needed to get those refinements back and submit to them.
So Helen,
Cross your fingers.
go ahead, I think I cut somebody off. Somebody was gonna say it. Okay, I was gonna say, so is the grant specific to just the Paseo? Is it limited to that area or?
So the grant is for $150,000 and the DDA is looking to enhance both Paseos and the crosswalk. Now, CDOT also has a grant opportunity for municipalities for up to $2 million for similar projects.
Mhm.
And so I'm working with the Public Works Department. They're applying for, I don't know the exact amount yet, but to build another crosswalk up near the Gothic Theater, which has been, they got all the way to construction documents years ago, but it's never been built. So we don't have to redesign everything. And then also to fund the marquee lights over Broadway installation. So the city has allocated some supplementary funding to get those projects going. That becomes a local match for Public Works. And we're hopeful that CDOT will fund both of them because the two projects collectively could do a lot to increase access and multimodal options downtown, but also calm traffic, the whole stretch. We need more elements that sort of signal to everybody, just slow down, there are people in the area.
One time we were sitting outside on the patio at at Englewood Grand, watching people go across the crosswalk, and it was kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
I was wondering if maybe rumble strips would help, if you put, before you get close to the crosswalks. I don't know if that fits in this grant, but.
We've asked a number of things of Public Works. I think what they're going to do is a traffic and safety study at that crosswalk that would inform subsequent improvements to the signal and the design of that crosswalk. We may not be able to pay for everything, but at least we've called it out and we're identifying the public safety concerns. I mean, we met with the stakeholders in that room over there last Wednesday and discussed all of this. And that evening there was a collision right at the crosswalk. And I've got a photo of it. And Zomo has video of it. It's a common situation where a man pressed the button, looked both ways, started out on the crosswalk, and a big Jeep came up, and they weren't really watching. Suddenly they jam on their brakes, and the vehicle behind them crashed into them. The pedestrian was unharmed in that case, but it's appears to be a relatively common dynamic. I don't have crash data on that particular crosswalk yet, but it needs to be addressed.
There's lots of different things. It just depends on, snow removal and do they want to cut into the pavement, but there's a lot, we'll just have to figure out what the best bang for the buck is. Since that meeting, I know I myself just was driving that way, and because the lights are so low, you can't see them. The first row can see them, but it's the cars behind cannot see them at all, depending on how big an SUV or a truck is right there. And so that's where I think, again, just visibility of raising the lights and getting some other type of flashers, but that's one of the most expensive things that can be added.
I know, yeah.
Signalization is very expensive.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I was standing out there a couple of days ago with Vi and Don from All About Bikes, and and Vi's looking at the lights with me. She says, "Well, look at them. The light bulbs are too small." And I'm looking, there I am, and they are too small. I don't know if they're LEDs but they're small, and so put bigger bulbs in there.
Well, that's exciting about the grant, Hillary.
Yeah, really exciting.
And make those improvements.
Yeah, so that's where we're at with that. The next item was just the downtown cleanup. We had the crews out over the weekend, on the sidewalk areas of South Broadway and Old Hampton, doing a lot of spray washing of all the benches, trash cans, street furniture, spot cleaning of the sidewalks, cleanup of any graffiti. They swept all the gutters. But you'd be surprised at how much grit and grime was out there. So anyway, that's been done as well.
Great.
I have one question on, sorry to back up on the grant. I mean, I know you want to get that submitted. Is there still an opportunity to get additional letters of support in?
Yes, there is. I'm not gonna do it until next Wednesday, so
Okay.
thank you for permission.
I know that will help me immensely.
I know.
Trying to get caught up. If anyone else would like to do it, it's just a short letter,
Yeah,
everything.
yeah, we're getting several letters of support from the adjacent businesses. I don't know if you have any time, Diane, to jot a couple paragraphs, but it would speak strongly to have Craig in support of it as well.
Okay, anything else on the downtown cleanup? Okay. I have a question about general cleanup downtown and how this affects the DDA, but so they did some graffiti cleanup, I think you said. There's a storefront a couple doors down that is constantly just covered in graffiti, and it keeps getting worse. I think it's at 5280 Ministries, and then the street level is vacant. They're maybe someday gonna put a restaurant in. They've been working on it for like 5 years, I don't know. But it's constantly covered in graffiti, and I just was wondering if there's anything that this board can do to say you have to keep your storefront clean.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know how it works in Englewood, but in Denver, you can report them to neighborhood inspections, and the city will come clean the graffiti itself. Do we do a similar service?
I do not know.
It's probably a city nuisance, so yeah, code enforcement.
Do code enforcement.
Yeah,
I was just curious, because you brought up graffiti, and I was thinking, what about all that graffiti down there?
typically we would look at graffiti in the public right of way,
Right.
not on private property so
Right.
much, but yeah.
Okay. Okay, land use and urban design, did we mostly cover that?
That was a more in-depth overview of the city center project. Do you guys want to defer that for another time? We've covered, who owns what land, framework agreement.
It's 5:30. How do folks feel? Do you want to hear this tonight? Do you want to push this to July? Board members, any opinions?
I prefer to push it. I have another meeting to get back to.
Okay, I have 6 o'clock.
We can push it.
Okay,
I do like your idea, I don't know if you're very good, about an all-day meeting. It just feels like there's a lot of stuff to get caught up on.
yeah. We might need to do a couple of those as we're getting organized. Okay. So we can do board members' choice. There are a few things we have to talk about tonight on this. EDDA contracts is one of them, particularly with our contract with Hillary right now with Portal Works, which expires on July 31st. Jump in and correct me if I say anything, if I misspeak, but we, in our IGA with the city, we agreed to follow their procurement policy. I think with the amount of the contract, there's a provision where we can either take bids and review all the proposals that we get, or we can say, how do they phrase it?
It's the optimal source justification.
Yeah. Optimal source justification, where we could, I think, say, city council has to approve any of the contracts that we do, so I think.
No, that's not true.
No,
So
they
this,
don't.
the procurement policy applies to you and you sub in this board every time the city council.
Oh,
Yeah, we don't have to go to city council.
wow, that's fantastic. So, we can either do the optimal source justification and choose to continue with Hillary, or we can decide to open it up for bids, but that would leave us with no executive director for however long that took
Right.
us, if we wanted to do that. So,
And same applies with legal services.
actually, so we have separate contracts.
Well, I'm actually a sub under Hillary.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
So
So, but we don't want to continue that.
We'd like to
arrangement.
break that.
Yeah, we'd like the DDA to contract directly.
Separately. And both of those new contracts would need to start August 1st if we didn't have any gap.
Right.
Okay, so Hillary, can you tell us what the process is if we do the optimal source justification?
Well, I want to find out more from the city, and it might be in the code, it might be in a finance document, but what that entails, it's likely similar to what appears elsewhere for professional service agreements where there's an exemption based on an entity's ability to deliver a specific service or a longstanding institutional knowledge, and that increases efficiency. So let me find out what exactly needs to be sort of offered up to make the justification. I'm fairly certain we could justify it if that's the board's direction. And then the approval of the separate contracts could appear in July,
Okay,
along with that justification for board approval.
okay. And so then the contracts could be issued and signed and never have a lag,
Without a gap.
if that's the way that we wanted to go. Board members have any thoughts or opinions on the approach we take here? The fastest one. I agree, and I think that just for continuity and the wealth of knowledge and expertise that we have in this room right now, I think we should absolutely say that that's the optimal source. That's my opinion. Does anyone disagree?
No.
Okay,
Hillary, we can put you in touch with Nancy Fenton, who's in our department, and she interfaces with the procurements group pretty effectively.
Yeah, I have her email.
Okay.
I'll ask her about that justification.
and we can handle all of that at our next meeting then. Okay, awesome. I have a couple other things that I'll just go ahead since I have the floor right now. Zoning, I'm glad we're moving this to July, what we were about to do. I think that it's important for us as a group to figure out how we can work in lockstep with zoning. And so that when they're, just that we understand what their plans are, what they're working on, and what they want to see from us and what we want to see from them. And if we're, if we don't want to see a 50-story building built right next door, how do we work with zoning to make sure that that doesn't happen, and all of that sort of stuff. So I want to make sure that this board works closely with them. And the retreat or series of retreats, I think we should figure out how many we want to have. I was thinking we would wait until after if we knew if we were gonna have a ballot measure or not, but maybe there's so much that we don't need to wait and we can just do one anyway.
You can have sort of special
Special
sessions, but on focused topics, like the city center project or the placemaking plan or the 285 bridge project. We're starting to get requests from city staff who want to present things to the DDA for feedback. And I want to make sure they're things you're interested in and that are sort of critical to our current strategy.
Okay, so maybe we can email. If you guys have thoughts or ideas that you would like to see in a special all-day type of meeting, maybe just email Hillary and we can compile those and put something together.
Could I just let you know about my timing? My July is pretty insane, both for personal work and the city.
Sure.
There's a lot going on, so
So maybe August.
August may be
Okay.
better. days to come in.
Okay.
Late August, please.
Okay.
And
Sounds good.
I don't know if there's a strategy on those meetings. We'd be happy to host, again, to have the ability to have large maps and displays and everything here, so we can, again, do it in this room. I would just need to know ahead of time, because these rooms are filling up pretty quickly.
I can understand why.
Yeah, this is right.
Okay, and then some people have said that this timing is not great for them, 3:30 in the afternoon. How would folks feel about moving to 4:30 start time? That work for you,
4:30 is better for me.
Blake?
I think I can make that work.
I can do that, but can I eat?
Yes. We will have our meetings where there can be food and beverages.
Yes.
All right.
Okay,
But still what is it, the third Wednesday? Fourth Wednesday, 4:30?
Do you want to start
Yeah,
that in
let's
July?
let's start that in July, and then I think the location of our next meeting, we had talked about having it at the Chase Building.
Yeah.
And then because Hugo offered it and said that he could take us all to the roof and we could do an overlook of the whole, of the boundaries of the DDA.
Is it gonna be 100?
We'll be starting later, so hopefully
Right.
it'll cool down a little bit.
Should we get a vote on that, because I believe the regular meeting time was set by motion, so if we could just have a motion amending the time to 4:30.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to amend the start time to 4:30 p.m.
Second.
Hold on.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to move the regular meeting start time to 4:30 on the fourth Wednesday.
I'm sorry, can you just tell me who moved?
I'm
Sierra moved.
Yeah.
Reinhardt seconded.
Thank you. Member Calvert.
Yes.
Member White.
Yes.
Member Reinhardt.
Yes.
Member Sarah.
yes.
And member Zerkin.
Yes.
The motion passes. In terms of location, I would like to check in to make sure that we have all the technology, et cetera, that we need to have it there, since we're recording and everything, and then I'll get back to you.
Okay, can you check in with Hugo directly?
Yes, that's what I meant.
Okay.
Yeah.
So board members' choice. Amy?
Nothing.
Diane? I'm good. And we don't have on the agenda, but we usually have director's choice as well. Do you have anything for us?
No, I don't.
Okay. Okay, public comment, I'm looking at the wrong copy of the agenda. Are there any members of the public here who wish to speak? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.
You're welcome.
This is great.
Thanks for being here.
Still smell the wood.
Yeah, it's really.
Yeah, smells great.
I guess I should have mentioned earlier, but since we are getting out a little bit late, housekeeping stuff, restrooms are right around the corner by those stairs. And then I know Justine provided everyone water and everything at the beginning. If you're thirsty ever, our water dispenser is in the corner and that refrigerator is running the house. If you want sodas, seltzer water, iced tea, whatever, it's in there. Just feel free just to go grab and go. If we're having a meeting here.
And I know how to use the tap, so.
Yes, well, yes. I didn't say anything about the beer, but if you'd like a beer, I think it's all beer from Locavore, which is a local brewery down in downtown Littleton area.
That was probably the best smelling restaurant I've ever been in.
Okay, I'm happy to do it.
There's a lot of men that work in this restaurant, so we have to keep that restroom fresh.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone.
Good job. Good job coming to a consensus.
You can return, well, I'll just hear it. Oh, that was one. Yeah, it's much more organized to just put it away than figure out who gets it.
Thanks, Joey.
Hillary, one thing, I was wondering if we can make arrangements either with the city or with your community. I mean, to spend $30, I mean, for another hour of work, then, you know what I mean, and normally you have a place of business where you can do that, so if we can figure out a better way. That makes sense.
I think so, yeah. Just keep getting nice to Nancy.
What'd you say?
Being nice to Nancy.
Oh, yeah, we have a relationship. Yeah, I'll ask her. If you need to do them, or if it's not a lot,
Yeah, I know.
if you can
No.
make
I made a bunch of
one or two,
copies today.
yeah, it's just
And thanks, Blake. This
Yeah.
is fantastic.
a whole production for you to.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, glad we made some progress.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for that too, because that was helpful. We, is the recording over?
Oh, yeah.
Posting that one. There was discussion about development agreements, there was discussion about politics.